Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today's call is going to be our graphs webinar. So we'll go over a little bit about how to create custom reports because the reports or the graphs are based off of those custom reports. And then we'll also talk through actually creating those graphs. My name is Brittany. And so a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. Everyone is muted. So if you have any questions, there's two options, the chat and the Q&A. It's easier if you all keep them just in the chat so I don't have to toggle between the two. So if you could just do the chat function anytime you have questions, go ahead and just type those in, and then every so often I will stop to answer those questions as we go. Now, it's an important note, we're not going to do a custom graph, meaning I'm not going to do everyone's request for those. You can always do a call with your account manager if there's a specific one that you would like to create, but this should at least be able to get you started. Okay, so obviously there are rights that would be needed in order to do graphs, okay? And it's based off of those custom rights. So if you're an admin, you're going to go into your menu, admin and system setup, which is where your security rights would be based out of. And then you have security settings here. So you can either go by group, which for this, I usually recommend going by right so that you can see if I click on something who has that specific right. It's just kind of easier to maintain. So first things first is it is graph based again. Okay, so the reports based. So if you go all the way down, then this is typically where the report menu is, but within each group, actually, I'm going to jump to the top. The graphs are a platinum specific right. So if you actually type in graphs, you would be able to find who can do what. So who can view the creatives graphs, the sales graphs, and there's graphs per app, I guess you can say. And so you're giving people rights to those individual graphs. Okay, and you're just going through and indicating who can view those. You'd go through and check the groups of the people that should be able to run those specific graphs. Okay, so again, platinum specific rights, or if you start typing in graph, it's going to narrow down those results. On the by group side, if I'm highlighted on a specific group, there is the need to be able to do data sets. Okay, so what I mean by that is when we build reports or graphs, they're based off of the data sets that we have in the system. So for my account manager security group, should they be able to see this specific data set? So it'll go through and say if it's hidden or visible. So you do have an all or all hide. So if I said, well, this group should be able to do most, I might do visible and then remove some of the ones that maybe they don't need, depending on how many I want to go ahead and give them access to. So that would be the second part of the security rights, is making sure that if they should be able to add in those graphs, do they have access to the different data sets that they might need? Okay. So I'm going to work to the report center side. And again, that's because the graphs are actually based off of most of these reports. So if you come into the report center, which was menu, you have everyone, there's the report center there that brings you here. And this is where you would see those data sets. So yes, we have those canned reports. You can create your own custom reports. And to do those custom reports, you're clicking on this. So here's those same data sets that I was mentioning, and these would also go to the graph side. So a lot of these are going to be available in graph form. If you're just doing custom reports, again, these aren't going to be graphs. They would typically just be your typical CSV, or they could be converted into PDFs as well. But if you wanted to know, oh, if I'm talking company contact data, this is where I would send you, okay? So on those rights that showed each data set, this is what I would mention going through and looking at. So clicking on this to get to this, just so that you can see what it means, because this is very important, where it'll give you the detail of how detailed you can go with that specific report. So if I go into things like projects, you'll notice that there's kind of 3 that have a similar name, but you'll notice some are labor net or with open orders. or what have you. So you have to read to determine, well, is this going to give me summary detail, or would it give me individual detail? Okay, so you'll notice some are just more summary. So this one wouldn't have a lot of detail in it, whereas some of the other ones would. Okay, so we have quite a few in here. And again, read through to determine what you want. You'll see some will say it's the same as views. Views are basically just your standard listing screens here. So there's no difference if I say timesheets here and I find timesheets up here, they might be the same level of detail. Okay, so that is kind of what you can do is just figure out, well, what does this one entail, and figure out would that work for what you're hoping to do. So a lot of times people will do something either timesheet based or client based to see, well, how much time do we spend on a particular client on a given time frame. So if you start typing it in, it will narrow down the results, right? So if I see, okay, I want to know some time detail, and this one will give me all time transactions. So it wouldn't be a overall timesheet to say, okay, well, they just did 8 hours on this day. It would break it down for each individual time transaction that they did. So maybe 8 hours equates to like 12 different time entries that they did. So again, thinking through, whereas this one would not be detail, this one would be each individual time transaction. So I'm going to click on this one, and you have groups and columns. So basically, how do you want to group it together? Most people with time detail would go by group. And then what are the columns that you would want to see? So my grouping might be maybe like the user name, and you could do full name, or you could do first and last. And then you go through and build what else you would want to see. So of course, I'd want to know how many actual hours they worked, maybe what project they worked it on. So you could do like project name or number. And that's how you go through and build. So as many groupings as you want, you can add in multiples, and then you can do as many columns as you need. If you're not sure what you're looking for, you don't have to type in, you could just click on the caret to get the full list of everything that we have. If you have custom fields, those always begin with CF for custom field. So you'll notice my custom fields will go through and show in here. And there's going to be a couple. So this would be employee custom fields. This one would be client custom fields, and this is deliverable. So it kind of tells you CF client, which means that my client records have custom fields. So you can build as many as you, or add in as many columns as you need to in here. And then you can go through and how would you filter this down? If I don't add filters, then it's pulling every single time transaction in my system. Okay, so obviously that could be a long list. So typically the things that you would narrow down for time entries would be some sort of date. So I'd come in and say, well, what was the date worked? And you always have conditions, which are basically, do I say it has to equal a particular field, doesn't equal, begins with, doesn't begin with. So you'll notice there's a ton of different options in here. So if I'm building a report and I want it to be based off of what was last month, then I can actually hard code that in here and say, okay, the date worked is last month. So every time I run this, it would pull for whatever last month was. So since we're in May, this would pull for all of April because of how I did the condition. So just know that you can do things like that for dates. So you can put some sort of hard-coded condition in there. Otherwise, if it's going to be different each time you run it, for dates, a lot of people will do a between. So they'll say my condition is going to be between. And I have the option of putting the dates in there, or if when I run it, I want to be able to choose it, prompt for values is what you want to go in and do so that it's an option every single time you run that report. I might also want to run it for a particular user. So I would do user full name. And again, do I want to do an equal to, meaning I can only choose one option? Or for something like this, I might do any of, which would give me the option of all employees in the system. When you're talking user, you can always do is me, so that every time I run this report, it would just pull off of whoever I'm signed in as and just show the values for that person. Or you could say is my department. So if I would run this report for everyone in my department, that is actually an option as well. So for this, I'm going to say the report is kind of open, and we'll just say I want to be able to choose the people that I run it for. Doesn't mean I have to put names in here when I'm going to go run this report, but it at least gives me the option. If I do no names, then it assumes it'll run for everyone. My last one might be if I want to know how many hours a client did, you can always choose client. And again, do I want to just run it for one, or should I be able to do an any of? So for this one, I'm just going to do an equals to, and I'm going to prompt everything. So that's what your filter section would do. Last one or last section would be settings. What do I want to call this? So it always just defaults to whatever the name of the data set is, but I might call this our time report for whatever you need it to be. So you can put in your report name. Anytime you do a custom report, it always defaults as private, meaning only you can see it, only you can run it. If people try and go find it in the custom report menu, they can't find it because it's listed as private. So only me, whoever I'm signed in as, would have that option. But if you uncheck private, then you can go through and indicate what groups should have access to that particular report. And you can pull in everyone, or you can just pull in a certain set of people that would need to run this particular report. It'll always go into my other reports option because there's a display group to say, well, the default is other groups. But you'll notice you have those different report headings up here. This is where you can go through and actually choose, well, maybe this is a time analysis report instead. So I'd put that in my time analysis group, and then I'd be able to look at that within here. If I'm wanting to see how this would look now that I've built it out, I always save the changes. It'll bring you to that particular report. Now you'll see the heading for a time report, and here's the filters that I did. Okay, so then I can choose the filters. Again, if I just search and don't use any search criteria, it runs for everything in the system. So I mentioned why I did that is because our graphs are going to be very similar. So under most of these headings, you're going to see graphs as long as you have access to them. Okay, so each one, we do have a different set of options in there. So we put in some of the standard that you might want to see, like invoice aging, amounts that are open, and revenue month to date, account manager revenue month to date. So anytime you see MDT, obviously you have your year to dates, your month to dates. So these are the ones that we've added in. We found that, sometimes people needed an idea of maybe what we can do for the graphs. So again, these were billing graphs. My creative graphs are typically things like hours. So my hours by service year to date, my billable status, time per week, how much has been unbilled, my time entered on time, meaning did I enter it on time or did I enter it in past the date that I should have, and then whether I submitted it on time at all either. So these are something that you can go in and edit if you needed to, like if you wanted to change any of these standard ones or remove them because maybe that's something you don't need, and time entered on time or timesheet submitted on time. If that's not something you look at, you can always go in and edit. This would give you two options. You can edit the ones that we have, or you can go in and actually create a new graph. Okay, so if you want to just try your hand at doing a new one, this is ultimately where you can go in and do that. Otherwise, if you said, yes, I like this one, but I want to change something around, you can either edit it or you can make a copy of it because maybe you're afraid you're going to mess it up and you want to be able to kind of revert back. Copy to is your best option for that because it's going to leave this original one as it is and then make a copy so that you can go in and play with that copy. So again, those are your options: is create a new one, see if you can get what you're looking for, or if you said, I like these ones, but I want to go ahead and edit it in any particular way, you can go ahead and click on that edit option. So I'm going to create a new one. Again, I need to remember where I'm at. So I'm in that creatives one. So I'd want to be able to go in and make graphs that make sense for creatives to see, right? Otherwise, if I was in sales, then I'd be looking maybe at opportunity or, something similar to that, maybe conversations or, what have you. But most of them have a graphs option. Resource Manager is one of the few that really doesn't, right? Because we don't really know what you'd put a graph for on the resource side, but almost everything else. And then the account admin actually has two different sections for graphs. One is going to be managers graphs and one's going to be owners. So just keep that in mind, that where you're at would, you want to make sure that you have the right graphs in those different areas. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with the creatives graphs for now. I'm going to go ahead and edit and create a new one. So you do that plus button. This is why I went through that whole report side, is because again, you want to go through and it looks very similar because again, a lot of the data sets are going to be the same. So if maybe I want to do again time, I might come in and say time, and then again, I have those same different options in there. So I'll go ahead and do the time detail with no costs in here. And then what kind of graph do I want? So you have 4 different options in here: bar graph, line, a pie graph, or key metrics. Key metrics is typically only going to work if you have, if you're using like the GL accounts side. Otherwise, these are pretty handy for most of the items that you would want to do. So you're probably using the graphs more than you're using key metrics. But let's say that I want to do a pie chart. And then you really have a couple of different options. You have the x-axis and then you have the y-axis. If you do something else like line chart, you'll notice that a series came in. So it's almost like a third data set option. So just keep in mind that your options might change based off of what you actually choose in there. So this would be the different options or the fields that I can pull into the x-axis. So I might say maybe that I want to know again who did it, so user full name. And then my y-axis might be, I don't know, actual hours worked. And then client might be the other option that I choose. You can do roll-ups, meaning how do I go in and do this? If it's more number based, then you're usually doing things like sum. If it's something else that's not numbers, you might do count or something similar to that. So I usually just keep it at the sum option. And then how do I want to sort? And is it going to be ascending or descending? Next would be my filter. So again, this will run for everything in the system if I don't do some sort of filter in here. So you can either hard code it, meaning again, I might do a month to date or year to date or some sort of range. Otherwise, you might just be able to do the search criteria when you're looking at those graphs. So most of the time you're going to hard code those in, you're going to add the filter. And again, this looks the same as we saw before, where you're choosing what is the field that we want to filter for. I always do date first, date worked, just date worked. And then maybe I'm going to do, because I don't do a whole lot on my system, I'm going to go with last month and hope that I have time entries in there for last month. I might also do something like if this is specific to me, or if I always run it to run for whoever we're signed in as, then again, I might do username. And I might say is me in there as an option. So again, you have those different options in there. If I choose is me, then again, it's just going to run for whoever you're signed in as. And then maybe I do, I don't know, one more, maybe I do client. Oops. And we'll prompt for values. And the last section would be that settings section. So you're going to come into settings. And again, you have your graph name. So I'm just going to call this our test for the webinar for now. And then where do I want my legend? Always defaults to the left, but you could do right, top, or bottom, whatever you would prefer. You do have a report description, though I don't find a lot of people would typically use that. Tab name is going to be similar to when we were in there, we had the option of where did that report get housed? Did it go to the custom report section or did it go to one of the different options? The difference with this is something you free type in. So even if I added different tabs in my system and some of those graphs are already there, I'll show you what I mean by that. So I have 3 different tabs in here. Okay, I have graphs, I have creative, and I have testing. Okay, so I have those 3 different groupings that I can fit those in. So if I say I want to look at the creatives graph, I only put one graph in the creative bucket. Next one would be testing. I only added one in that one as well. And then the other ones are just all under graphs. Okay, so if you leave that blank, it'll typically just group with graphs because that's the default. Otherwise, if I wanted to put it in testing, you would want to make sure that you go ahead and type in testing. And if you want to create a new graph, again, you're just typing in whatever that name should be for that different tab. Okay, so the kind of caveat with that is, let's say I put graph instead of graphs. Well, then I might have graphs, testing, and creative as an option instead of having them all be under one. So a little bit of caveat, this is never going to be a drop down. This is truly just a free form field. And then you want to make sure if you're trying to match up with some of those other tabs that you spell it right or have it the same way that you have it in there. Okay, so again, if I just do graph singular, it's going to have a 4th tab in here. Okay. Now you have targets that you can put in. I usually don't put a target in there, but you do have that option. And then you can also put in a description for each of your axes if you needed to. Now, who should this be visible to? It'll just default to everyone, but I can go in and say, well, I want to go ahead and remove this person and maybe these people, because maybe it's not their function. Maybe they never add time. So then maybe running this would never be of use to them. So what you can do from now is actually do a refresh just to see, well, what am I going to see? Now, this is what I was afraid of, is I don't really have a lot of data in my system. So I might remove the is me in there and just see, did we have any other data in there? Looks like I don't have anything for last month. So refresh, and then now I have data. So this is a great way to see, well, what am I going to see instead of going and saving and then taking a look and seeing, did we get what we wanted? So if I like how this is, great, then I can go ahead and save it. If I want to see, well, I see the bar, but maybe I want to know what it looks like in the line graph, go ahead and refresh, and then it's going to go ahead and show it. Obviously, this is less clean in my opinion because there's lines everywhere and I find it very hard to kind of read. So for this particular graph, the way I have it set up, the way I have my filters, line graph is probably not the best option. So I can go in and see my pie chart. This is going to be a little bit different because it got rid of my series. So I really would just have like two points of data in there if I needed to. So I'd probably want to switch any of these over so that it made a little bit more sense, because as it is, there's not really an option for me to see that. So again, great way to see, well, what have I done so far and do I like it? And then if I don't, then I can go in and change pretty much anything that I need to. So I'm going to go ahead and save this as it is. It'll add it in typically towards the bottom. You can always adjust where these actually show. Where did I put it? I'm going to go ahead and save and see where. Oh, right, because I put it in a different group. So if I go in, maybe I don't remember what group I put it in, but it's not refreshing. So then what I could do is go in and edit. And if you wanted to move different things around, you can. So if I said I want this one to be lower, you're actually just kind of clicking and dragging wherever you want it. So if I want these two to kind of be side by side, you can go ahead and move them wherever you want to. You can expand them or contract them as needed. So maybe this is a longer chart, as you can see, you can go ahead and move it around as needed. Okay, so you can delete things if you don't want them. You can copy them, or you can move them all around based off of maybe what you're looking for. I don't know where that one went, but just create it again. Client. Okay, so there's my test. And then again, if I want to see how everything is looking, I go ahead and save. And then there is my test that I created. So with this, obviously you have your hours that were worked. I have what client it was, and then who my user is. Now, because I added a filter that I could choose, if I come in, then you'll notice there's my client any of option. And when it's an any of, you're basically just choosing whatever you want. And again, if you leave it blank, then it just shows everyone. I should probably pull in my test client because I don't. So if I go ahead and hit search, then it's going to go ahead and run those filters that I just did, and you have your scroll bar to see everything. So that's what it'll look like. If you hover over the information, it'll go ahead and give you actual hours worked and what percentage that is. So you do have those different options. And again, you can continue to change this. You can also go through and clear your filters out. Even though I just did client name, it'll also tell you this box will search in the client name, client ID, project full name, campaign, full, the username. So if I said I want to go ahead and see Ben Franklin, go ahead and hit search, then it'll just show the results for Ben. So you don't always have to put in filters because some will have automatic filters that are built in. But if you did want something like an any of or an is me, then you want to go ahead and fill out or do the results for that actual filter. So you're going through and setting up those filters. Any questions right now? Okay, so then you can create as many graphs as you want to. And then again, you can put them under the different sections. The copy to will allow you to actually copy it to like a different set. So if I said, well, I want this one also somewhere else, instead of having to go in and recreate the whole thing, that copy to will give you the option of we're in the creative graphs, but if I also want that under accounting or owner or something like that, you can go in and actually copy it to another group so that you have it in several different graph sections. So if you really like one and you think that other groups should have it or different sections should have it, that copy to will also do that. But if I, again, wanted to make a copy of this one to play with it in the same group set, you can just choose wherever you're at, and then it'll go ahead and create that copy in there. Okay, so there's the copy. It'll always label it as a copy, so you can go through, edit it. This one, what they did was said year to date and is me, so it's just showing me the results for my information. It's not showing anyone else. You can go in and edit it as you need to. And again, you can just go through and set it up however you want. You can change things and determine is that how you want to see it. And then of course, if not, then you can either change it back or just delete the whole thing as you need to. One thing that I skipped over was calculated fields. So in your custom reports, if you said I needed a column that was actual hours minus, let's say, allocated hours, and we would call that remaining, it's called a calculated field. So you have the option of going through and setting up your own calculations if your data set does not have the option that you're looking for. Kind of similar with the bar or the graphs here. You can go in and say, I want to go ahead and use a calculated column for this instead. So if I said use calculated column, it'll ask you, well, what's the caption? So in my example, remaining was going to be the example. And then what's my formula? It'll show you all the available fields that you have. Okay. And so what most people would do is they might say, okay, I want to take the allocated hours. So you're just clicking on it to add it into your formula. And I want to go ahead and minus my actual hours worked. So actual hours worked, click on it. You'll notice the plus symbol does come in automatically. So if you're not looking for it to be added, then you can go ahead and remove it. And then if this is ultimately your calculation, you can go ahead and hit save. Otherwise, if it's more complicated than this, then you can always continue to add in whatever fields that you want. But just know that you would also need to make sure you have parentheses for certain things to tell the system, well, what would be first, and then, maybe what would be next, or whatever you would want to do. So just keep in mind that if you're doing calculations and it's a little bit more involved than just kind of one set of numbers minus another, then you would also need to do your parentheses or your different symbols to make sure that the system knows what you want to do. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of that. But again, that's what a calculated field is the ability of doing actual calculations on certain fields. Okay. Any questions right now? Okay, so then the other item that I will mention is that you can actually print this. Now it's important to note that when you go in and print this, whatever you see on screen is exactly what it's going to print. So if a report had not rendered, so if I go into maybe here, before it actually showed me that graph, I went in and printed it, it would show, that it was still working on those results. So if I come back into here, when we saw the no data or whatever for that split second, it would actually print that information. So just keep in mind that you want to print once the whole screen has rendered. You have those different options of how you want to do it. Do I want to save it as a PDF to send to someone, or do I want to actually print it through my printer? Is it going to be portrait or landscape? So your typical options for that. So again, just keep in mind exactly as you see it on the screen, that's what it's going to print. There's no options to print just a certain graph. So you'll get the whole screen as you need it. Okay, so then really the last thing is setting up the different tabs, right? So I mentioned that the only way that you get these tabs is when you go through the edit and actually edit that particular graph. That setting is where this comes in. So you'll see it's in testing. If I remove that, then it'll just go to that graphs section because that's the default. Now on certain graphs, so I'm in a pie graph, there is an option to do a maximum count if you want to. So it's only ever going to show me, 12 different results because that's what I have as my maximum. You can go ahead and change that number if you needed to. And then again, if I go in and refresh, then it would show me, what that would look like if I go in and change that option. Okay. So maximum count item would be there. If someone doesn't have the edit rights, they don't have that option of going in and hitting edit. They would just be able to see the reports and print them, but they won't have an edit option. They wouldn't be able to move things around. They wouldn't be able to edit the current ones or create new ones. So just keep in mind that this could be just a view only page if you want to set it up to where people can't create their own graphs. Otherwise, you can give them those edit rights. But if they're editing it, that would edit for everyone. Okay, so it's not just for you unless it's a private report, it would edit for everyone. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So that's really what I have for you guys. There is a whole help guide on it as well. So if you wanted to see what the help guide was, or if you forgot what we talked about or how to do something, if you type in graphs, custom graphs is the first option. And then this gives you the detail in there as well. So just keep in mind that this is always available for you. And then the recording for this will post usually in a couple of days. You'd be able to see that on the help guide. So if one of your friends or coworkers missed it, they can just go to the main page. You have webinars as an option here. And then it would obviously be a 2020 webinar and you'd be able to see it. So right now it's just in the upcoming because that's where we're at today. But then it would get posted in here whenever it's actually rendered and ready to be posted. Again, you have the option of reaching out to your account manager if something is not working or you're trying to get a specific graph going and you can't get it to work. You're more than welcome to reach out to your account manager, support@workamajig.com. Otherwise, if you want to set up a specific training to maybe go over an exact graph that you're looking for, then you can always do training at Workamajig, and that would also get you to get to your account manager and they can schedule that call for you. Okay. Any questions before I let you guys go? Okay. So they asked if they'll receive a copy of the recording. It gets posted in here. So we don't send them out to each person that attended. It'll just get posted in this webinar section. So again, if you're in the support guide, oops, this is the home page. You can click on webinars 2022, and then usually within 2 or 3 days, it'll be posted here. And then if you actually click on the link, it would then pull up that training. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank you. Well, let me see. Can you please advise what time it is on your end? Right now it is 10:30, 10:37. So most of your, well, all of your support people are in Arizona. So we're on either Mountain or Pacific. Any other questions? Okay. Well, again, thank you all for attending. We will be, I think we have these usually every week or at least 2 webinars a month. So you can always sign up for additionals or you can watch the previous ones that we've done at any point. All right. Thank you all. Have a good one.